You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we talk with a feminist documentary filmmaker who has uncovered a veritable epidemic that may already have affected your health. And we talk with a Muslim feminist comedian troublemaker in the very best sense. Last, the Joan of Arc defender of climate science is with us. She is drawing fire from all the climate change deniers. 3 groundbreaking women. But first, we need to look inside the headlines. Given the headlines this week, it felt mostly and a little unfamiliarly good to be an American. Across the country, rainbow flags were going up and Confederate battle flags were coming down. A Supreme Court majority validated affordable health care and marriage equality and protected low-income housing, but also disgustingly protected the death penalty yet again. At the deeply moving funeral service for Reverend Clementa Pinckney and the other victims of racist assassination, President Obama rose to his greatness with the eulogy. There's much more work to be done, we know that, but a breeze of hope breathed into us. And since major court decisions always have ripple effects and consequences, both intended and unintended, I want to glance at just 2 of them, one negative and one positive. The first is, remember the Hobby Lobby decision, or as Justice Ginsburg called it, the Hobby Lobby minefield. Well, the National Women's Law Center released a report a week or 2 ago on the Hobby Lobby minefield, the harms, misuses, and expansion of the Supreme Court decision, about the ways this past year that Hobby Lobby decision had been misused and expanded in attempts to sanction discrimination in areas beyond birth control coverage, which is what the case was about. The report, for example, listed George versus Kankakee Community College, in which a paramedic student claimed his religious beliefs should exempt him from vaccination requirements, a Kentucky court ruling in favor of a print shop that refused to make T-shirts for a gay pride festival, an attempt to undermine labor protections by arguing that the National Labor Relations Board had no jurisdiction over a religiously affiliated university, and an attempt to evade criminal prosecution for violent kidnappings. You can get the report from the National Women's Law Center. You can also check out hashtag Hobby Lobby Minefield, or go to www.nwlc.org/told-you-so. Then there's a good one, an unintended or intended, not by the court, I don't think, consequence of the marriage ruling. Conservative religious schools all around the country forbid same-sex relationships on their campuses, from dating to living together, even in married student housing. And they're very upset right now because they're afraid they will be forced to make a terrible choice. The schools might have to abandon their policies that prohibit gay relationships or eventually risk losing, wait for it, their tax-exempt status, which frankly they should never have had to begin with. The religious schools are very concerned that if they continue to ban gay relationships, the IRS can take away their tax-exempt status because it violates a fundamental national public policy under the reasoning of a 1983 Supreme Court decision that allowed the agency to revoke the tax-exempt status of schools that banned interracial relationships. Ha ha! Madison and other framers would be very pleased because they would never have thought that the religious schools should have tax exemptions anyway. And that would be a very, very nice consequence, intended or unintended. Intended or unintended. In any event, all in all, a good week for this country. And now it's time for my first guest. Sini Anderson is a documentary filmmaker whose work you may have seen if you saw the excellent film The Punk Singer, about Kathleen Hanna, herself former riot girl, and a former guest on this show and a friend. After making The Punk Singer, Sini Anderson became involved with her newest project, So Sick, which is about women, artists, and Lyme disease. So this could affect your life. Sini Anderson. Sini, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much, Robin. Happy to be here.
You did a brilliant film about my friend Kathleen Hanna, the rock singer, the punk rock singer and conceptual artist, and her journey with Lyme's disease. And now you're doing a feature-length documentary titled So Sick, about feminist artists struggling with late-stage Lyme. Please tell us about this project, because it affects women more than men. 80%, you write, of the late-stage cases are women. This is probably one reason why it gets ignored or trivialized.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's so, it's strange. I was, in fact, working on The Punk Singer about Kathleen Hanna. Previous to working on that film, I don't even think I ever even heard of Lyme disease. About halfway through our production period with Kathleen, and the reason that we started making the film about Kathleen was because she was incredibly sick and dropped out of the public eye, and nobody knew what happened to this, pretty revolutionary feminist artist that just kind of disappeared.
That's right.
It's our politics within my feminist art community to try to help each other not disappear. Mm-hmm. And so we started making The Punk Singer, and we didn't know what was wrong with Kathleen. About halfway through The Punk Singer, she was finally diagnosed with late-stage Lyme, and I'll tell you the difference between late-stage and acute.
Good. I was just going to ask. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And we were really relieved that there was an answer to what was going on with her health problems. It was, we were fearing, those people close to her were fearing for her life at that time. She was pretty sure she was going to die, and they weren't going to figure it out, as was her husband and her close friends. So when she got this answer that it was Lyme disease, I think everybody was really relieved, because, we thought, okay, there'll be a treatment, she can get rid of it. And it's just not that simple, Robin. And I learned more about Lyme disease during the making of that film. But in an ironic twist, about 6 weeks after Kathleen was diagnosed, I ended up in an emergency room in New York City, and I was having problems with my heart, and we weren't sure if I was having a stroke. My speech was completely slurred, and I just started going downhill really quick. I was diagnosed with late-stage Lyme 6 weeks after my subject of the film I was making. It just sounds unreal.
Yes, it does.
I was really publicly quiet about that so that I could concentrate on the film and finish the film about Kathleen. We also didn't want to make The Punk Singer too much about Kathleen's illness, because we didn't want it to wipe out her, really awesome career.
That's right. Her accomplishments, herness. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So, but we knew, both Kathleen and myself knew, that we wanted to make a political point and for her to be honest and out about her diagnosis and what was going on with her. And we wanted it to, kind of pack a punch. By the time we finished The Punk Singer, between Kathleen and myself, we knew of 17 other feminist artists that were also diagnosed with late-stage Lyme disease, just in that short period of time.
Wow.
I had been incredibly sick trying to finish The Punk Singer. I ended up having to have a PICC line placed, which is a central line that goes straight to your heart, to deliver daily high doses of IV antibiotics. And for months on these IVs, and receiving more and more phone calls and emails from other women that were sick, I was like, what is going on here? Why is nobody talking about this? And, at that point,
Because 80% of the late stage cases are women. That's why, possibly. I'm sorry to be paranoid, but we've been through this with autoimmune, which was all in women's heads. When it's women, somehow it's they're making it up, they're exaggerating, it isn't that real, So sorry to be paranoid, but too bad,
Yeah, well, Robin, it's not paranoia; it's just the facts.
Yeah.
And I feel, the film was pretty much handed to me. It was kind of a no-brainer that this was going to be my next documentary. And
what is late stage Lyme disease?
Right. So there are several different stages of Lyme disease, and then there are co-infections of Lyme disease, which are additional diseases that are carried within the tick, that the tick transmits to people. So it's a very complicated disease, and this is passed by a tick, by the bite of a tick. Late stage is considered when you don't catch the infection. And here's a really important part about this. When you don't catch the initial tick bite or the infection, the disease it's a spiral keat shape. So it's called a smart bacteria. And the smart bacteria is a spiral shaped corkscrew bacteria. And when you're infected, it after a while will go into and hide. These corkscrew bacteria will hide in the large joints, the brain, and the hearts.
Oh God!
And it acts like autoimmune, which is that it comes out in flares, and you'll have symptoms for a while, and then it'll start to dissipate and maybe go away for a while. So it doesn't stay consistent, mainly when they're going to the doctors with these complaints of some of the effects of what's happening with Lyme disease, and they're kind of, they're being brushed off by their doctors. They're being told that they're depressed, that they're stressed out, that it maybe is hormones, or that they're premenopausal or menopausal.
This has happened to two friends of mine who were misdiagnosed for years.
And there's a lot of misdiagnosis. So women are being brushed off with their symptoms. That's one major cause of late-stage Lyme for women. So what happens is, after years of not catching this disease, and it can happen actually within 6 months, the illness starts to get so strong and so debilitating that it can completely take over. So what happened in my case was, I was actually infected for many years before. I didn't catch those symptoms that I was having were all being brushed off as different things. And then my immune system finally got low enough when I was making the punk finger that the floodgates just opened. And so all the symptoms rushed in, and they completely took over my system.
It is treatable at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I think that we don't know enough about Lyme disease right now, and the goal is, what's so sick is not to provide a ton of answers, it's to ask really good questions.
Right, exactly.
And to be a witness to these women who are suffering, and who are no longer able to be in their lives. So you can treat the disease in late stages, but it's a very slow process. It's a very expensive process. It's not covered by insurance companies.
Wow. And there are at least 300,000 new cases each year, and some healthcare activists believe that the number is much higher. Is that true? That's correct?
That's correct. And those are acute cases, Robin. So those are just new acute cases, and so that's what the Centers for Disease Control is reporting.
That's the tip of the iceberg, then. That's just
the tip. It does not, that number does not include chronic cases, misdiagnosed cases, or the co-infections that are incredibly dangerous.
Oh my God.
So we have an epidemic in front of us. There's something very complicated going on with the difference between men and women and how we process the disease. We think it has to do with the immune system, and we're looking at right now, in the research for the film, the possibility of that actually being a difference with
Yes.
hormones.
Well, you know about the Foundation for Gender-Specific Medicine and that whole field, which is now opening up and is so important, not only for women but for men as well. And gender-specific medicine is now beginning to come into its own. So this certainly is a candidate for that.
Yes, I mean, we really need it. What we know is that 80% or more of cases of chronic fatigue are women.
Right.
And 80 to 90% of the cases of fibromyalgia are women.
Mm-hmm.
And we really kind of need to get to a place where we're just saying enough, and I believe that we can do that with media and with film.
Well, a feature-length documentary, which is what So Sick will be, will go a long way toward raising consciousness because it goes places that nothing else can go. How can people help, Sini? Help you finish this film, find out more about women and Lyme disease?
Yes.
The film is at what, the fundraising stage? Are you into production yet? What?
Yes, we're about halfway through production at this point, and we are nonprofit. The film is nonprofit through Women Make Movies, which is a feminist film distribution company in New York. So if listeners were to go to Women Make Movies and look up So Sick, you're able to donate to the film there directly.
That's Women Make Movies, and look up So Sick, the film, and you can.
That's correct.
Get involved.
And we'll be putting a Facebook page up in the next month or so midsummer, 2015, and hopefully that will be a place for women to network with each other. Yeah,
this is like so many everything else is a woman's issue, and I'm grateful to you for the films you have made, for the film that you are making. When So Sick is done and ready for release, please come back on the show and talk more about it. And in the meanwhile, people can go to Women Make Movies, look up So Sick, the documentary film, check out Sini Anderson and help in any way you can, and get educated about this because it affects all of us. Thank you so much for your work and for being with us today, Sini, and all best luck with your own health.
Thank you so much, Robin. I really appreciate it.
It's time for a short break here. This is Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and coming up is a feminist Muslim Iranian-American comic who is brilliant. And what's more, the Muslims are coming. The Muslims are coming. So don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. Stand-up comedian Negin Farsad made the documentary film The Muslims Are Coming, which follows a group of Muslim American comics on the road as they encounter Islamophobia and perform. And she has written for and appeared on various shows all over the place, MTV, PBS, Comedy Central. She's appeared as a stand-up comedian on the Joy Behar Show and at Town Hall on Broadway and the Laugh Factory in L.A., and she is a powerhouse in herself. So here is Negin Farsad. Welcome to the program, Negin.
So glad to be here.
So very glad to have you here. You've been a comedy writer for Comedy Central, and you've been a stand-up comedian and still are, and you're a director-producer of a feature film, Nerdcore Rising, and of the documentary The Muslims Are Coming. Where is there time for all of this juggling and for being so superb at all of it?
I'm an Iranian American Muslim, and in the beginning I really just wanted to go into acting and just be the kind of go to auditions and then just book 1,000 roles all the time, and that was like I was like, that's how it works, right? You just go to auditions and then magically you start getting employed.
Oh.
But it's not how it works, actually. And I quickly learned that it's especially difficult when you're a woman of color and you're auditioning for these mainstream parts because they don't really the default option on average lady is not a Middle Eastern woman. And so.
Gee,
and
now
so
you
I
tell
kept-
me.
Right. So I don't know if you've noticed, if you've ever turned on your TV, there are not multiple ethnic people running around on television. That's just not how we do it.
I have noticed that. Or if there are, they turn out to be Western European Americans in walnut paint.
Exactly. Or they're just the wife of a terrorist or something.
Yeah, with fun role.
Right. So for me, I was just really tired with those options, and I had been doing sketch and stand up, but the stand up just started getting more and more a part of my life because it was the only place where I could control my voice and what I had to offer. And then the movies, I just started being like, oh, I'd like to see a movie like this, and then I kind of threw down the challenge to myself. Of like, okay, well, if you want to see a movie like that, why don't you make it? And that's kind of how I started making the movies. And so now it's gotten to the point where I don't, auditioning is really, in waiting for other people to tell me whether or not I can be in a piece of media is really an afterthought. Now I just try and go for it myself. And I think that's a burden that a lot of women and a lot of ethnic women of color content makers, have to deal with. Is
to create the field yourself.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's like a weird. It's great in some cases, and then in other cases you're like exhausted, because you're like, why can't you just cast me?
Well, yeah, at least you're on the cutting edge of the way creative work is going anyway. In other words, anybody who is doing really cutting edge work is going to have to be at the cutting edge and do it in a sense themselves.
Well, and the other thing for me was that, I like most comedians, I have a master's degree in public policy and African American studies.
Oh yes, all stand-up comedians do that, particularly the feminist women of color. Yeah, it's such a cliche, Negin.
I know, I'm boring at this point.
God,
it's rampant. Because my goal was not to be an artist. I didn't want to go into this field. I wanted to be an adult, you know what I mean? I wanted to wear pantsuits and have some sort of paycheck. And that was really...
Raucous laughter.
And speaking of pantsuits, I even interned for Hillary Clinton. I interned for Charlie Rangel. I was in the political world, knee deep, and I really, my goal was to be the first Muslim president. Barack Obama beat me to it. Hey,
that's
he's not
right.
Muslim.
That's right.
But I, so I was doing, I was a policy analyst for the city when I started out. And I would, go to city council meetings, and then at night I would go do stand-up. And, at some point it became deeply inappropriate. But also, my heart wasn't in it. But I thought stand-up and comedy in general is such a narcissistic field. Like, what can I do to make it less narcissistic? And really, that's when I kind of decided that I was a social justice comedian. An as yet unverified genre, and I decided, I really this is how I'm gonna make, I'm gonna do the comedy, but there has to be some sort of social purpose to it, and so most of my work, does have, my last film, The Muslims Are Coming, is a big example of taking an idea and making sure that it has like a social purpose heft.
Where can people get a hold of it?
Basically, I rounded up a bunch of Muslim American comedians in a nonviolent way, and we went around the country. We went to places like Tennessee and Alabama and Arizona.
Oh my God!
Just the natural places for Muslims. And,
oh yes.
We did these shows, and we called them The Muslims Are Coming, and we did street actions, like we would have an Ask a Muslim booth, and people would come and ask us questions. But we also interviewed people like Jon Stewart, David Cross, Janine Garofalo, Louis Black, like just amazing icons in the comedy world who were hilarious about Muslims. And the movie is available on iTunes and on Netflix. And on it's a documentary, but I even hesitate to use that word because it is like a popcorn munching romp, and you will like have a a good time, even though you may just very accidentally learn something slightly.
Oh, God forbid. Well, your titles alone are. I have to back up for a minute, listeners. I encountered Negin at TED, the TED Talks thing, where she was performing. In fact, she's a TED Fellow, sick. I don't know why they can't say graduate or scholar, but they're saying fellow, which is sexist. But never mind. I'm a word person and I carp. Carp. Anyway, so we were both presenting, as they say, which makes me think of baboons. But we were both presenting, and I just fell in love with her. You are so wonderful on stage, so funny. So feminist, so terrific. And so I asked for her card because I wanted to kidnap her for the show. And obviously hold her for ransom. And the card itself is a work of art. For example, there's her website, which is neginfarsad.com. But then there's the business website, which is www.vaguelyqualifiedproductions.com. And then there's one for the film The Muslims Are Coming, and one for Nerdcore Rising, and one for thirdstreetblackout.com. So, it's just, and you identify yourself on the card as 1A. We don't get 1, 2, and 3. We just get the A's. So it's 1A female, 2A social justice comedian, 3A writer, 4A director, 5A actor. I mean, it's a work of art, this card.
It is weird that I only gave the A's. I do. I recognize that.
So what is next on your multifaceted self?
Well, I'm right now in the middle of a lawsuit against the MTA because we here in New York City tried to put up a Fighting Bigotry with Delightful Posters campaign. We worked with the MTA for 5 months, and at the last minute they pulled the plug, citing that our posters had some political content, which I think is crazy because we had posters that would said stuff like the ugly truth about Muslims. They had great frittata recipes.
Yes.
It was just really, really ridiculous, funny stuff that's just basically trying to take, the narrative of being Muslim and take it back so that we just have something out there in the mainstream that isn't defined by Fox News and isn't defined by all the other negative stuff that's out there. And that was the whole point of the campaign. It was shut down by the MTA, and so we decided to sue them based on First Amendment grounds. So
I should hope so.
I never thought I would sue. And by the way, you mentioned my company, Vaguely Qualified Productions. The most hilarious thing about this case is that it's Vaguely Qualified Productions versus the MTA, which I think is going to be ridiculous on any legal docket. But so that's kind of like it's art in court.
Right.
An art in court project that I have going on right now. And then I'm the miseries of writing. I'm engaged in that currently because I have a book that'll be coming out in 2016 called How to Make White People Laugh.
Oh, God, wonderful.
Yeah, and it's kicking my butt, and I don't know how people do it.
Yeah, well, writing is pretty. It's first on one hand, it's the best fun that you can have sitting up. On the other hand, it's like, to mix all my metaphors, it's like going down into the mines looking for that tiny glint of gold or silver or diamond, and so you when you emerge, you sort of have emotional and psychological black lung disease, and it's no wonder. So but that's a sign that it may be really good.
God, let's hope, because I've been coughing up a storm.
Okay, well,
is that what happens with black lung disease? I don't even know.
I think so.
I was trying to go with it.
Something like that. Well, listeners, follow this woman on neginfarsad.com, on vaguelyqualifiedproductions.com, and anywhere that you encounter her. Not for nothing did Huffington Post call her one of the 50 funniest women. I presume they meant in the United States, but I will just up the ante and say in the world. You're a treasure, and if ever I can be of any help to you in your peregrinations, I would really love that.
Thank you so much. You're so awesome.
No, well, right back at you. Take care, and thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Thanks.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. The New York Times reported in late June that a prominent modern Orthodox rabbi, modern Orthodox, I think I know what that means, but it does seem oxymoronic. Anyway, this rabbi has been criticized for taking boys as young as 12 years old, naked, to the sauna, and he defied the board of his synagogue and told the congregation that he would remain as their spiritual leader. Jonathan Rosenblatt is the rabbi's name. It's Riverdale Jewish Center in the Bronx, New York. He had agreed to negotiate with the board on a deal to buy out the last 3 years of his contract. This was after a previous New York Times article about his sauna talks with boys. But he apologized, and he told the congregation that he intended to stay at the helm of the synagogue that he's led for 30 years, that it was a crisis created by his own lapses of judgment, that he was sorry, but it was disproportionate to ask him to leave. And the board of the synagogue had told members that they were going to try to achieve an amicable resolution, but his lawyer said that the rabbi had decided to stay because it's the rabbi's life, and he didn't want to leave the pulpit. He just didn't want to. I won't. The synagogue board apparently doesn't have the power to remove him. Shortly after he took the reins of the synagogue in 1985, he started taking the boys around bar mitzvah age to the gym to play squash. We will just pause and think about that for a while. Afterward, he would shower beside them and would take them to the sauna or the hot tub, where, naked and with them naked, he would have discussions about their lives and their faith. And he said that the sauna talks were critical to his mentoring process. Oh, the sins that can hide under the words mentoring process. Several of the boys, who are now grown men in their 40s, told the New York Times that the rabbi had made them uncomfortable by gawking at their naked bodies or by touching a leg during one-on-one nighttime chats. The synagogue's leadership in the 1980s and 90s knew of these visits into the sauna and urged him to stop, but took no other action. It's appalling. He finally, or so it's believed, in the 1990s stopped doing it, and he went on to mentor instead rabbinical students, older boys, and interns from his alma mater, Yeshiva University, and the university eventually stopped placing interns with him. Say I. And in 2011, the Rabbinical Council of America had him agree to stop taking congregation members to the sauna. In any event, he is now sticking in and holding his place, and he intends to fight. And I say he is a schlemiel, a schnook, and a schmuck, and that this is surreal. It's time for another pause here. I'm Robin Morgan. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I'll be back in just a moment or so with a woman who has been called a living legend by her own colleagues for being the prime defender of climate science against the troglodytes who are climate change deniers.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. About my next guest, Dr. Naomi Oreskes, the New York Times wrote, quote, "She helps raise money to defend researchers targeted for criticism by climate change denialists. She's become a heroine to activist college students, supporting their demand that universities divest from fossil fuels. Climatologists, though often reluctant themselves to get into fights, have showered her with praise for being willing to do it. She's been called a lightning rod for the ire of the climate deniers, and they have attacked her heavily." Her response is, most people would think it's a bad thing to be a lightning rod, and I can't say I enjoy it, but remember, the whole purpose of a lightning rod is to keep people safe. Here is the remarkable Naomi Oreskes. Dr. Oreskes, otherwise known as Naomi, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You've connected the dots in the rather crazy, to me, critics of climate change by unearthing what stones they crawled out from under. How did this get started, that you dug that deeply into the history of climate change denial and documented where it was really coming from and why?
Well, like my colleague Eric Conway, with whom I've done this work, I'm a historian of science. I was working in the early 2000s on the history of oceanography, and I came across a very interesting story about oceanographers who, going back to the 1950s, had recognized the potential for burning fossil fuels to drive disruptive climate change. And I thought that was pretty interesting to discover that this science was so much older than I think most people at that time realized. Mm-hmm. And so I started studying it, learning more about it, and then I began to realize that in the scientific community, there was really no argument at that time. So this is around the year 2002. There was really no argument that climate change was already happening, driven, largely by human activities. Yet in the media, it was being presented as a great big controversy. And so I wrote a paper that was published in 2004 in which I just said that. I said there's a scientific consensus on climate change. There have been a few more papers like that written since then, but mine was actually the first to say, yes, there's a consensus, and to do a quantitative analysis of what that consensus looked like in the peer-reviewed literature. And when that paper came out, wow, I started getting attacked. And I started getting attacked by the people who we ended up writing a book about. So really the way the book came out of the experience of being attacked and asking myself, well, who are these people and why are they attacking me and why do they hate climate science? Because this
book was The Merchants of Doubt?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And you might think that people would say, okay, we could argue about what to do about climate change, but the facts, how can you be arguing about the facts? So that was, in a way, kind of the mystery that Eric Conway and I tried to solve when we wrote the book Merchants of Doubt.
Wow. And the fascinating dots that you connected, which, once they're connected, they seem obvious, like all great discoveries. But it's the long tail, the legacy of the Cold War.
Exactly.
The same group of people, were the ones who denied acid rain, the ones who denied the ozone shield was fragmenting, the ones who denied tobacco could give you cancer, and are now on climate change.
Exactly. So there were two big discoveries. The first was that there was a pattern, and as you just said, that it was the exact same people, many of the same organizations, who actually had a pattern of denying scientific evidence related to a whole host of environmental and public health issues, going back to origins in the defense of tobacco. And then the second part was sort of what was the politics and ideology that was driving it. And as you mentioned, that really came out of a kind of Cold War anti-communism that thought that by defending free market capitalism, they were also defending personal freedom and liberty.
Wow. And they were our scientists who kind of had lost their cachet with the end of the Cold War.
Yeah. Again, part of the mystery that we were trying to make sense of was that we discovered that the people who were attacking me were actually scientists. And that seemed mysterious. Why would scientists attack science? And especially, it turned out, some of the people, as we began to unfold the story, some of the people involved were actually extremely prominent scientists. So one of the people was a man named Frederick Seitz, who was a president of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in the 1960s. Wow. So a very distinguished physicist, a person operating on a very, very high level. Right. So why would a distinguished scientist attack the work of his own colleagues?
Yeah.
And so that was one of the questions that we wanted to answer.
And how you answered it, in part, they were employed by, for example, the tobacco industry.
Right.
Maybe not him, but some of them.
No, Fred Seitz was. So we discovered that Fred Seitz had, in fact, worked for the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, had worked as a consultant to them for 6 years, from 1979 to 1985. So that was kind of the first clue that something strange was going on. And then, again, as we dug into it, thought, well, why would a distinguished scientist make common cause with the tobacco industry, and especially so late? Because in the 1950s, you might have credibly said, well, we're still not really sure about some of this. But by the 1980s, there was absolutely no question about the harms of tobacco. So why would he do that? And that's when we began to unfold this ideological idea that defending people's right to smoke, defending the right of the industry to smoke, to sell tobacco, even if it kills people, that was somehow understood as a defense of freedom and democracy.
God, I have a real reverence for science, and not. I'm aware of the fact that it's been misused, for example, by the Third Reich, but that was a misuse and abuse of it, and I'm rather fond of the truth, and science is a way. Science is an interesting way of getting there. The best way, I think, other than poetry, but there's a science to that too. Never mind. In any event. How do they reconcile this with themselves as scientists?
Well, that's a great question. And again, it was one of the things we were trying to make sense of. So I think that ultimately this is a story with many ironies. And one of the ironies is that they have a philosophy of the ends justifying the means. So even though they hated communism and criticized communism for exactly that, they themselves operated in the same way. I think they persuaded themselves that they were fighting for a greater good. And of course, the Cold War, if you think about the Cold War and all the terrible things that were done in the Cold War, think about the weapons of mass destruction that were built, think about LSD experiments. I mean, all these terrible things that were done, but justified in the name of containing communism and defending freedom. So in a way, it's an extension of that. But in their own minds, that this was a kind of slippery slope to socialism, a backdoor to communism, that, first you begin to regulate tobacco, then you begin to regulate the entire marketplace. It's a slippery slope argument. You begin to plan the economy, and the next thing you know, we're living in a Soviet-style dictatorship.
I see. Well, God knows they're entitled to their opinions, but it's that they claim that the science itself is at fault when it's not. That's the betrayal of their own most deepest supposed commitment as scientists. That's the mind-boggling part. The physicist S. Fred Singer complained that you were being protected at University of California, San Diego by a, quote, mostly feminist mafia. Tell us about the mostly feminist mafia, and where can I join?
Yeah, that was exactly my reaction. Where are they? Exactly.
Damn.
Yes, I know, exactly. I know. If I could find them, I would join as well.
You mean they've been around all this time and I haven't known about them? Hell, I want
exactly.
in.
I know, that's exactly what I thought. Filed complaints against me with my university. And yes, so they had this email that was leaked that accused me of being defended by a mostly feminist mafia, which I find hilarious on so many levels. But of course, the bigger point that they miss is that to the extent that my universities have defended me, and they have, and I'm very appreciative of that, it's defense of academic freedom, it's a defense of research, and of course, as you said, it's a defense of truth. The whole point of this is to try to understand what's going on about a very serious and important public policy issue, and the kinds of activities that these folks have been involved in are a gigantic distraction technique that prevent us from talking about the real issue, which is what do we do about this problem?
Yeah, exactly. And there doesn't seem to be any shame involved in these guys. Most of them, I assume, are guys, but these people, in any event,
they are guys. I think you can say that.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay. We'll go with that. I mean, when it's discovered that they were salaried by Reynolds Tobacco or, whoever, there doesn't seem to be an oops, I got caught, or I'm uncovered or now. I mean, that I have been a merchant of doubt. There's absolutely shamelessness.
And that's the part of it, the whole thing that's, I think, on some level, the hardest part to understand. And often when we were writing the book, that is exactly the word that came to my mind, was shameless. I thought, these people are just completely shameless. And I sometimes Eric and I would call each other and we'd say, how do these people sleep at night? Mm-hmm. And the only answer I can come up with that is what we've already discussed, that they persuade themselves that they're working for a greater good. And they also persuade themselves that they are smarter and know better than the rest of us. So some of the people we studied clearly, had that kind of egotistical, narcissistic vision, and that comes out of the Cold War as well.
Yeah.
There's one particular person we study who, usually actually I try not to focus on the individuals because it's the larger pattern that is the important issue, but this person's family are attacking me shamelessly now, so I no longer feel like I have to be kind to them. But Bill Nierenberg, who was the head of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where I worked for many years, and I knew Bill. And the thing about him is that in many ways he was a great person, but he let that greatness go to his head. He had worked on the Manhattan Project. He had been chief scientist at NATO. He had been an advisor to admirals and presidents. He had operated on a very, very, very high level in U.S. science and government. And I think it went to his head. I think he thought that he knew better than other people. So, there was one conversation that I had with him many years ago that really stays in my mind. I think that he thought, there'll be a little climate change, but it's no big deal, and you guys are all overreacting, and we'll solve this all with technology, and don't worry your pretty little head about it. And I know better than you do because, after all, I'm the man. I'm the one who talks to the president. So the whole history of the Cold War, the history of their involvement, Bill saw himself as a world historical figure, which he was. He was a world historical figure, but
he
that kind of became. Yeah, it became a kind of pathology, and that's not unique to him. I mean, think about Edward Teller.
Right.
Think about some of the other, infamous scientists who sort of became enraptured by their own significance.
That's right. Yeah. Well, another word for it is patriarchy.
Well, and you did mention that. I mean, it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that virtually all of these people are men. But that, of course, again, comes out of the Cold War context, too.
That's right.
There were very few opportunities in the Cold War for women to rise to these sorts of positions of influence and power. So I suppose one day in the future, if we have a powerful female merchant of doubt, then we'll know we've achieved true equality.
Oh yes, what a depressing thought. I hope not. I hope not. I hope not. I hope we're a little bit different. The book, one of the books, if you haven't read it, listeners, is which came out in 2010, is Merchants of Doubt, and this last spring the book became a documentary film by Robert Kenner. So be on the lookout for that. And there's a wonderful science fiction short version of these truths by Dr. Oreskes and Dr. Conway called The Collapse of Western Civilization, A View from the Future. And it's a great read, and it's a great arguing tool and to brandish. And you are just fantastic. And if you ever need to hide out in a red wig, curly, underground, from these people who are vilifying you, give me a call and we'll find you a place in the Underground Railway, because we'll
build that feminist mafia, right?
Exactly. If it doesn't exist already, we'll start it, by damn. We sure will. Thank you, Naomi, for the remarkable work that you do, and I know you'll continue to do, and for trying to save the world, and also for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure, and I greatly appreciate the appreciation.
Time for one last pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will be back in just a second or so with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again, in time for some fighting words. The British writer E.M. Forster, as an epigraph to his novel Howard's End, simply had two words: only connect. That had a huge impression on me when I first read it as a teenager, and it still does, and I've been thinking about it more lately in terms of what I wish my colleagues in the media would do. For example, when there's a freakish weather occurrence, the terrible winters increasing in the northeast part of the United States, the rising floods and waters across the world, the increase in earthquakes, the increase in storms and tornadoes where tornadoes never were before, if every time they were reported on there was a comment, even a rhetorical question asking, is this part of climate change? Or some scientists say this is part of climate change, or indeed, more truthfully, all scientists say this is part of climate. That would help raise consciousness and educate people. Well, there's a new example that needs connecting about homegrown terrorism. The Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security and the Police Executive Research Forum have published a new study from the New America Foundation that shows what we had suspected, that most U.S. attacks are homegrown and not jihadist, and they're not Muslim either. The breakdown of extremist ideologies and their actions and their attacks might come as a surprise to some people, but not to law enforcement. Since September 11th, infamous September 11th, 2001, nearly twice as many people have been killed by white supremacists, anti-government fanatics, and other non-Muslim extremists than by radical Muslims. 48 have been killed by extremists who are not Muslim, including the recent massacre in Charleston, South Carolina, compared with 26 by self-proclaimed jihadists. That's what the Washington Research Center New America found. Non-Muslim extremists have carried out 19 attacks since September 11th, according to the latest count. But by comparison, 7 lethal attacks by Islamic militants have taken place in the same period. The survey, which also checked with 382 police and sheriff's departments nationwide, asked them to rank the 3 biggest threats from violent extremism in their jurisdiction. 74% listed anti-government violence. It takes your breath away. The threat from Muslim extremists is simply not as great as the threat from right-wing extremists. Some killings by non-Muslims that most experts would categorize as terrorism have drawn only fleeting news media coverage at all. In 2012, a neo-Nazi entered a Sikh temple in Wisconsin and opened fire and killed 6 people and wounded 3 others. He was a part of a white supremacist group called the Northern Hammerskins. There's many more examples of that. When the perpetrator is not Muslim, and particularly when the perpetrator is, as he almost always is, European American, the immediate commentary is on his mental illness. He must be crazy. He must be a bad apple. I would point out that what is never commented on, including by this new survey, is the fact that he is male. With non-Muslims, though, the media does bend over backward to somehow put it in the psychological category. With Muslims, never. A 2009 report by the Department of Homeland Security, which warned that then, at that point, ailing economy and Obama's election as the first black president might prompt a violent reaction from white supremacists. This was withdrawn, this report, in the face of conservative criticism in Congress. Would you believe? Its main author, Darrell Johnson, accused the department of gutting its staffing for such research. In the famous, dreadful Oklahoma City bombing in April 1995, Timothy McVeigh, the early news media speculation assumed it was Islamist motivated. So if every time there was such an attack, the media took on board and communicated the fact that it was not Muslim, it was not extremist in an international context, it was extremist in a domestic context. It was right-wing, white supremacist, and I would add male supremacist, motivated and acted upon. That would help change consciousness. Come on, my brothers and a sister or two in the media. Get with the truth. Only connect. Context is really important. Only connect. And that's it for today. The last straw this week is Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who apparently no longer stoops to argue law or even rationality in his dissents, but instead airily relies on Victorian-era verbiage to dismiss decisions with which he disagrees, words like jiggery-pokery, argle-bargle, and gobbledygook. So to him and his attempts at intellectual gestury, I say he is a cur, a bounder, a mountebank, spouting balderdash and twaddle. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, Senior Producer, Crystal Williams-Chancellor, and our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week, right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.